Okay, we'd like to welcome each and every individual to Voices of Integrity for Mental Health. And today we have an interesting question from Tim. Tim, go ahead and share your question for today.
How does one stay um confident but not overconfident, and how does one have humility?
So Tim always asks these interesting questions. You think, what? Like it's really cool. So when you look at the quantum feeling model, you know, entitlement is overconfidence that I know what I deserve, and you have to go ahead and give me, you meaning my parents, or you meaning my friends, or you meaning significant other, or the government, or the business, or whatever. So entitlement is all rooted around overconfidence. Like, I know I'm entitled to you to treat me this way or give me this. Self-righteousness is also rooted in, overconfidence, and that I know what's right, I know what's wrong, I know what's good, I know what's bad. I'm doing good, you're doing bad. And so that's overconfidence too. Victimhood is you treated me in such a way that hurt me. And now because you've hurt me, I am a victim, and I then am entitled to certain things. And so, what's the inoculation for these three? And thankfulness, humility, and ownership. Now, that's pretty simple, pretty straightforward, but it's not. I mean, that is, but when you look at, blind spots, like this is something that I'm working on right now, is, we all have blind spots. And so people are entitled and don't even realize it. People are self-righteous and don't even realize it. People are victims and don't even realize it. And so, this comes from our 7 kids and our, 8 grandchildren. So, what's really holding people back? Why do people not want to know what is really holding them back? And why, once they know, will they not seek to solve a problem at the core level? This is like the strangest thing in the world. So there's this natural law that I don't know what it was 10, 20 years ago that we discovered. It's called the next dimension principle. And this next dimension principle is an interesting principle. And it actually comes, the story of this is an interesting story because in my business side, I asked people, it took me 18 and a half years to discover how to go ahead and determine if somebody is coachable, meaning they're humble. And so you ask them a series of questions like 1 to 10, how would you rate your coachability? Most people say 8 or 9. And then your 1 to 10, your listening skills, 1 to 10, 1 to 10, your sense of urgency, 1 to 10, your persuasion skills. So you ask them 1 to 10 questions. And then at the end, you go back through and you then say, how would you respond if somebody said you were this? And this and this and this and this, and how they respond, you can tell if they're coachable or not. Anyways, there was a guy that I asked this, and he said he was coachable at a 10, but I knew he was only coachable at like a 1 or 2. I mean, he was totally just not coachable. But then at the end of it, I said, well, what if he's right? And I'm like, but I know he's not. And I'm like, well, you're not being humble. Well, what if he's right? I'm like, well, but he's not. I'm like, well, maybe he is. Maybe he's right. And maybe you're right, Mark. Maybe you're both right. I'm like, well, how is it possible? And then I thought, oh, like it mapped out this entire thing. So what is the next dimension principle? It's like on a 1 to 10, 10 being the highest, you know, most people think if you ask them what's a higher number, a 2 or a 9, people say, of course, a 9 is, you know. Um, but when we look at this, a 2 in the next, once you hit a 10 in a dimension, you go to the next dimension, and the 2 in the next dimension higher than a 9 in the previous dimension. And so And so you look at this and you understand that the more we know, the more we know we don't know. And so, questions on this, Tim?
I wouldn't say I have anything. Um, so what do you do when someone thinks that they're thinking at a next level dimension, but you think that they might be being overconfident?
You can typically, you know, ask them a question that, like, I think when people say they disagree, I think that's a stupid thing to say. Why? Because when you think about disagreeing, what is disagreeing? Disagreeing is saying, I think I know what you're saying and what you're thinking, and it's wrong. Well, shoot, you don't even know what you're thinking and saying. How am I supposed to? I don't even know what I'm thinking and saying most of the time. I mean, I understand some of it, but I don't understand the depth that's really there. And so disagreeing immediately, it just creates drama and, and challenge. And so if we say it's interesting what you're saying, I think I might have a difference of perspective. Now, if somebody says that's interesting, what's your perspective? And you say my perspective is this. Then you have a dialogue. You're in harmony. You're trying to find out, well, what are they saying and why are they saying it? And they honestly don't know what they're saying or why they're saying. Most people just don't. I don't most of the time. It's always interesting to me when people say, like, I know what this model means. Yeah, I understand it. And it's like, really? I mean, I created it 11 years ago. And I don't even know. I'm still learning things about this model like every day. And so I think in the back of our minds, Tim, like you can ask people questions and say, so why do you feel that? Why do you sense that? Why do you say what you say? I have a perspective of this. It seems like it might be different than your perspective, but maybe it's not. Like, like when a famous book says the truth will set you free, what does that mean? It means that we're enslaved. We actually like being enslaved. We do. There's a benefit to being enslaved. Like I'm not responsible. I'm a victim. There's nothing I can do about my situation. It's not my fault. I'm in this situation. It's somebody else's fault. So we actually like being enslaved. There's a benefit psychologically to being enslaved. And so people want all the benefits of freedom, but they don't want the responsibilities that go with it. Does that make sense, Tim?
I would say so, yeah.
So here's something that's very interesting. And so when you break through to a new dimension, like when a toddler is learning how to walk, when a toddler is learning how to walk and they stumble and fall, nobody around them says, well, you're a loser. You'll never walk again in your life. Everybody encourages them. But as adults, we don't do that. We don't get that. We don't do that to other people. Like, hey, way to go. You made a mistake. That's awesome. Mistakes is how we learn. The next level is in every dimension, there's a new set of rules. Like I think you're the one that introduced me to the term, adulting. I'm like, what is adult? It's like adulting. You said it's being an adult. I'm like, okay, interesting. So as a child, so Tim has a nephew and he's 11 and he does certain things at 11 that you'd kind of expect maybe a 3 or 4 year old to do. And he thinks it's funny. And it might be funny or might not be funny, depending, I guess, who you are when you're 3 or 4. But when you're 11, the rules change. And if you don't change with those rules, if you don't change with those rules, then something's not going to go ahead and probably go well. And so when you go from a 2.5 to a 5, there's a teacher. It's like, what's this new dimension that I'm in? And then from 5 to 7.5, this is a coach. And so a coach, like a football coach, he's going to encourage you, or she's going to encourage you, or they're going to kick your butt, or they're going to expect you to execute certain things. Like a teacher doesn't really expect you to execute. They expect you to have head knowledge. But if you don't take that head knowledge and take it into a hands knowledge, well, that's not going to do, anybody any good. And then a Navy SEAL is going to be, it's going to be getting to a 10. It's moving to where, like, you don't find Olympic gold medalists. You don't find, like, Tim went ahead and said, hey, Dad, I think people are jealous of you. And I remember when he told me that, I said, jealous of this? Like, there's so much stuff. But then he says, yeah, but you're married for 39 years. You have a successful business. You have 20 to 30 extra hours of free time a week. You own a number of companies. You have a lot of freedom. You're helping a lot of people. I'm like, okay, I guess I can see that. And so how do you be humble? You understand how little we know about the universe, that we're not that smart, that if we become prideful, all of our learning, stops. So once we get to the top of a dimension, once we get like Calvin and Hobbes, the comic, I'll never forget one of my favorite. He's a little sassy boy. He comes home one day from school. He's like, Mom, I'm not going back to school tomorrow. And she's like, Calvin, why is that? Or why are you saying that? Or you're going back. He's like, no, I'm not. Why? He's like, because I learned everything I need to learn. I don't need to learn anything else. But we laugh about that, but as adults, it seems like we do that. So we get to a top of a dimension, and there's what's called a dimensional gap. And so we often level off here. This is true in relationships, it's true in everything. So there's risk here. You got to make a jump, or you'll slide back into, previous ways of thinking or doing. So what moves us forward is face, see, understand, do, humility, great stewardship, contentment, self-discipline, perspective, and a strong life vision. What holds us back? Fear, do not see, lack understanding, do not do, pride, poor stewardship, lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, low morale, lukewarm. So when you look at these different things, all of these things, all of this on the right leads to arrogance, a lack of humility. These things all lead to, humility, where, what we see now is more than what we saw before, but hopefully not even anything close to what we'll see in the future. And then when you look at these here, this is what's called a fractal. So I was introduced to that word by Greg Wittick. I'm like, what's a fractal? It's a pattern, like a snowflake is a fractal. It's got patterns. So in nature, you see patterns. And so there's these dimensions in all different areas of life. And so somebody can be really, really smart, but not so smart. And so you can go up and down in these things, or you can continue to just go up, or you can continue to go down. So if we look at this fractal and go into, this is where, let's say we're right now in our relationships, or it could be, in the addictions, it could be in, in financial, it could be professionally, it could be, anything. It could be any and all of those things. So what happens here is this is where we're at. So we don't see back when we were just, a toddler, and we don't see something in the future. So we're able to see something a little bit further out than where we are. So this is, let's say, where we're at. This right here is going to be the sweet zone. This feels good. When we ask questions, they say, wow, that's a great question. So if somebody goes ahead and that gets defensive or angry, upset at a question we have, maybe we're asking too far out of a question. When somebody says that's a great question, now you're still in flow with them. You're still in flow. You're still okay. Now they're like, they're thinking. Like, nobody says that's a great question intentionally, probably. You do it as a reflex, like, that's a great question. And this is where somebody's looking for answers. Like, this is where they're looking for answers. They're not probably looking for answers out here, unless they're mentally, ill, maybe like me. Like, it's like, what are the questions out here that would be asking? And then you have, this is the hazard zone. This is, this is where the 9 Ds kick in. So this is where the 9 Ds kick in, where it's like, distract, defy, defer, deflect, defend, defensive, deny, destroy, deceive, disguise equals defeat and depression. So when you look at pride, which is, arrogance and a lack of humility, it's pridefulness. And so people who are prideful have depression, which is strange because if they're so good, why would they have depression? Which is, it's just, I don't know. I think it's just really interesting. This is the life zone. This is where life takes us. It takes us beyond the sweet spot, the hard zone, and we're thrown in. This is the blackout. This is like hitting the runner's wall. We get stuck. We feel like quitting. We often give up and don't make the breakthrough. This is where addictions kick in. This is where entitlement, like I believe every addiction we have is entitled, where like Tim's oldest brother, my oldest son, John, he said, when I drink alcohol, I'm stealing tomorrow's joy. So he had this huge insight into what alcohol did to him, but yet he couldn't break it, and it led to his death. It contributed greatly to his death. And so when we get stuck, we feel like quitting, often give up and do not make the breakthrough, or we fall back into some type of addiction. When the 9 Ds to destruction kick in, why? Because people either say things we do not want to hear, or may ask us questions we don't like. So when somebody asks us a question, we get angry, we get upset. That's a trigger that, wow, they're close to helping us make the breakthrough, but most people black out. They quit, they stop friendships, they all kinds of stuff. And so the dimensional gap, this is where we talked about it's fear. In the dimensional gap, we have fear. We like it where we are. We feel safe. We feel good. We feel in control. We feel like we're having fun. We feel like we're loved, but there's something missing there. There's something missing in that gap. So the blind spot zone, this is the part where each human being, where we seem to be blind, or worse, is that we don't see we're blind and don't listen or trust those who can. And that's where we go into the attack zone. We go into attack the people like a wounded animal. We go into seek and destroy. This is the part with each human being where we seem not only to not only not listen to those around us, but we actually seek to destroy those around us through bitterness and poisoning the relationships of those who say things we don't like what they are saying, seeing, or saying. I mean, it's just, I don't know. So, Tim, we've been through a lot in this podcast on humility, but I think the significance for those that are listening to the podcast and hopefully going to share this with other people, because this stuff is just cool stuff. Questions or thoughts that you have, Tim?
I definitely say that I have gained some knowledge from this because I've been since I've been getting into a better spot, financially, mentally, physically, all of the above. I've been having some trouble with humility and confidence, and it's more like a playful thing, but like I've been talking to people like I know exactly what I'm doing, and I had some friends at work make a joke that I'm fishing for compliments. And so I'm like, I can definitely see that. And I know it's a joke, but in all types of jokes, there's some types of truth to the joke. And so I'm learning to how to still have the same level of confidence while meanwhile keeping myself humble and not bragful or postful. So, looking into the future and past the future, past my comfort zone and using that'll help. But also, looking back into the past and I remember, this is off topic, but I remember, probably good, 6, 7 months ago, I was asking you, I was like, why why do we have to live this way? Like this is stupid. We weren't made to, work like this and pay taxes. We should be in the forest, trading, blah blah blah. But I'm really glad that life is hard.
Right.
Um, I'm really glad because I'm not exactly where I want to be now, but I'm way ahead of where I thought I could be now.
Right.
Um, and so if it were easy, everyone could do it. And yes, I want everyone to get to a place that I am at, but I worked my butt off for this. And I'm going to continue to work my butt off for this, meanwhile trying to stay confident with humility. But it feels very, very good to be able to say I am where I am now. Because if it were easy, people would look at me like, oh, cool. You got, congratulations. So,
And this is where, you're looking at on the personalities, on the perspective of time. And so to develop, we should all live, I believe, in the moment with a hope for tomorrow, to be a better day, even though it may not seem like it's better, may seem like it's worse, but often the most difficult times in life are the best times in life. And so we have a hope for tomorrow, but we're looking at today and doing some things today that we might not like to do, might not want to do, to make it a better, tomorrow, and to look at the past. And when you think about the past, there's only really two reasons for the past. One is fond memories of the past, and two is to learn from the past. So a lot of times we look at painful situations, trauma, difficult, abuse, mistreatment. We look at that as a negative rather than positive, and we become enslaved to ourselves and our own prison. Whereas if we shifted our mind to say, those worst of times, those most difficult times could be the best if I want them to be the best, but it's a lot harder work. I mean, it is a lot harder work in the short term, but in the long term, I think it's a lot easier, because then we can, people have talked to me about what's true forgiveness. And I think true forgiveness is when I can say, like my wife, her dad went ahead and sexually abused her for 7 years, and it went all the way into our engagement. And at the age of 19, most painful thing I've ever been through in my life. In many ways, I look back and it was more painful than my son's death. Um, but that pain and how it helped my brain to process pain and look at difficult times helped to make my son's death not so hard. And when I look at all of the pain that I had when I was 19 and the pain that I had again when I was 55 and my son died of suicide, when I look at that and I say, I have a choice, I'm in control of my choices. And I can look at that as something bad, or I can look at that as something really good. It's my choice. And if I blame somebody else for that, then I'm giving up control of my life. And when I do that, it's probably not going to work out so well. And so I think you're onto something, Tim. I think the dimensional will help you. I have a little game that I play with my kids when their dad is lacking confidence. I'll say, especially to my girls, I'll say, hey, do you have anything you want to say to dad? And they're like, no, I'm good. Like, are you sure? They're like, yeah, no, I'm good. I'm like, are you positive? And then they'll roll their eyes and they'll say, okay, dad, you're an amazing dad. Now, am I fishing for compliments? I absolutely am. Why? Because I've lost confidence. I just don't think I'm a good dad. And so that's okay, because I'm not a good dad. And I want to know that I'm not a good dad. And to do that, I need to acknowledge it. And when I'm acknowledging it, I'm in a place of humility. So even fishing for compliments, even fishing for compliments can go ahead and be, a good thing if we know it. And it can turn it into a little game to where it's okay. But if it's something that, if it's something we're doing and we don't even know we're doing it, maybe not so well, you know, um, maybe not so well. In the fractal, understanding that we can go as high as we go, we can go equally as low. And especially in the areas of, and we slip back in to a pattern. And what took us, a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years to get to, and one time we can slip back all the way down to the beginning. And then the addiction has control over us again because we gave it control. So, Tim, your question about how to have humility, like, wow, like a lot of stuff in here. Love the question. Any other thoughts that you have, Tim?
No, I don't say I have anything.
Okay. So, if you're listening to the podcast of this, which you are, if you are, like, who do you care about? Like, I think in mental health issues, I think a lot of it, it's easy to go ahead and get caught up in ourselves, like it's all around us, like it's all about us. And I think a lot of, therapy centers around that as well. Like it's when you need to take care of yourself. And it's not that that's not true. You do, like an oxygen mask principle, like when you're in an airline and the oxygen goes out, you got to put it on yourself first. You got to do that. So that's true, but it's not. But I think in mental health, that we can become so self-consumed that often I find, like when I'm going through some of the hardest times in my life, and people like, I don't want to burden you with my little problem, Mark, when you're going through something so big. And I'm like, it's okay. Why? Because if I can take my focus off of my issues and focus on somebody else's issues, it actually helps my issues, or it can. This isn't all the time, every time. And so I think that, the voices of integrity for mental health, there's so much great content in here, but it's got to be shared. And so there's people that are struggling with mental health that we know, and will we pass this along? Maybe we will, maybe we won't. But there's people out there that are struggling with mental health and we don't even know it. Shoot, they might not even know it. So hopefully this has been beneficial to you. Pass it along to others. Always remember we can accomplish so much more together than we ever could on our own. Have an amazing day. Bye-bye.